In the 12th century, how many women owned land? How many queens actually impacted the country? How many wives could choose to divorce if they wanted to? The sad answer is, not many. I was one of the only women of the time who refused to be treated as property. I took control of my own life and never went down without a fight. This is my story. I was born in 1122 into the family of the Duke of a section of France known as the Aquitaine. My family was very wealthy and powerful and could trace our family line back to Charlemagne. In 1137, when I was 15, my grandfather died with no male heir. Therefore, I inherited the entire land and became Duchess. Meanwhile, King Louis VI was very ill, and the older of his two sons, who was trained to be king, died in a hunting accident. Therefore, the heir to the throne was now a frail little monk named Louis, after his father. King Louis was distraught. Thinking frantically, the old king came up with a plan. In those days, marriage was a purely political statement, unless, of course, you were poor, in which case you had no influence in politics whatsoever. As king, Louis had the right to marry his son to anyone in the kingdom, and he decided that if Aquitaine was linked to the royal family, and his son had a wife with ruling experience, there was hope that the kingdom of France would not disintegrate after all. That is how I came to be married to Louis VII. Now, Louis would not have been my first choice. I preferred brave knights and strong, decisive men, the very opposite of Louis. However, as I had no choice, and after all, he was a king's son, I decided that he would have to do. On the very day of our wedding, the king died, and Louis and I were now king and queen of France. I came to be fond of Louis. He was intelligent and kind, but he was still not very strong-willed, and he was very strict with rules. I dedicated my time to two things: making the cold, damp castle that I now lived in into more of a home, and trying to turn Louis into the strong man I wanted him to be. In the meantime, I had my first child. She was a girl, which was greatly disappointing. When she went mainly into the care of nurses, I continued my two missions. The first objective was succeeding somewhat. The latter was not. Louis spent many hours in prayer and, contrary to most of my family, actually listened to the Pope. I tried a new tactic. I decided to convince Louis to go on crusade. Crusades, or holy wars, were supposedly fought for God, so Louis would likely not object. The abbot of the church, Abbot Bernard of Clairvaux, wholeheartedly agreed to the crusade and wanted only the best for it. He specifically banned anyone who was not fit for war, such as ladies, minstrels, and troubadours. Shortly before the crusade left, Abbot Bernard left town on business with the church. Soon the crusade was on its way, with Louis and his legion of fighting men, and me, with a merry band of ladies, minstrels, and troubadours. Couldn't just leave them behind now, could I? The crusade went downhill. Shockingly, the abbot was right. I do not understand it. It turned out that my beautiful procession of entertainment slowed the trip down, and Louis was not changed by the fighting in any respect. The crusade failed, and everyone went home by tempered. After being home for a while, Louis cheered up. I had another daughter, there was peace in the kingdom, and everything seemed to be running smoothly. Things are not always as they seem. I was beginning to lose hope that Louis would ever turn from a monk to a king. Louis, oblivious to this, was spending his time running the kingdom, visiting other kingdoms, and of course, praying. I was thinking about who I would rather have as a husband. It was a long, long list, but at the top of it was Duke Henry of Normandy, who was very spirited, cared little about the church, and what is more, had claim to the throne of England. I worked hard to divorce Louis, in whom I had lost all faith. Eventually, I convinced Abbot Bernard that we were too closely related to be lawfully married. At the age of 29, I divorced Louis and almost immediately married Henry. Henry was related to me in almost exactly the way Louis was. The only difference was that I wanted to marry Henry and I did not want to marry Louis, which is a very valid reason. Henry was exactly the sort of husband I wanted. He was strong and bold. What is more, he had already been excommunicated by the church and was completely indifferent. I had a son with Henry, the first of 5. This one was named William. In time, have William, Henry, Richard, Geoffrey, and John. We would also have 3 daughters, Matilda, Eleanor, and Joanna. My previous daughters stayed with Louis. In 1157, Henry claimed the crown of England, and then we were uneventfully married for some time. However, as my sons grew, I started to notice that Henry may be a little too strong-willed. My sons were growing restless because they had been given crowns, but Henry insisted on ruling the kingdom without them. There was also the problem of John. John was Henry's youngest and favorite child. Unfortunately, as the youngest, he was the only son without land. In every other respect, Henry spoiled him terribly, and John Lackland, as he was called, had thoroughly convinced his father that he had every right to the land of the other boys. The other boys and I were not convinced. His brothers flatly refused, as they had every right to, and I backed them. I try to help my sons wherever I can, except John, and as Henry still refused to give his sons any actual ruling power, we began a revolution. It failed. There was no change whatsoever for the boys, but I was put in prison. Other than that, things were uneventful for quite some time, but all of my sons seemed to be unfortunate. By 1190, my only remaining sons were Richard and John, who were coincidentally my favorite and Henry's favorite. Richard also happened to be Henry's least favorite, and John mine. My daughter Joanna was also still living, but she was female, so less important. John still had no land inheritance, and Richard was heir to the throne and the entire kingdom. When Henry died in 1189, I was freed after 16 years in prison, and Richard became king. As he currently had no interest in marriage, I was fulfilling the role of queen. Richard set out on crusade, and this time I did not interfere, so it was more successful. Unfortunately, due to him being captured and imprisoned on his way home, I had to pay a large ransom to some despicable Germans, and he was not home until 1194. Philip, the current king of France, had declared war on Richard. In 1199, the news reached me that Richard had been killed in battle. John was then crowned, and despite my best efforts to teach him, was a horrible ruler. In 1204, I died. When I inherited the Aquitaine, I was one of the first European women to own property. I married not 1 but 2 kings, and mothered 2 kings, which was unusual. When I married Louis, I practically ruled for him, and when I married Henry, I was still one of the strongest queens of the time. I not only benefited the countries I ruled, but also worked towards better women's rights and am still an inspiration today. I am Eleanor of Aquitaine.